When we disassembled the watch, we had loosened the screws that hold in place the dial, and those were on the dial feet. You can see the dial feet here, dial feet. And what we want to do is, first thing we're going to do is we're going to locate the second hand pinion, which is right here, and that's what holds the second hand in. When we align the dial, the second hand pinion has to come through this little hole in the dial. Okay, so we're going to loosen the screws that hold the dial feet. What you don't want to do is you don't want to unscrew them all the way out. You want to unscrew them partially. And it's a nightmare to put these back in place if you do remove them. So now I've loosened the dial feet screws. The next step is to locate our second hand pinion. Second hand pinion right there. Second hand hole. We're going to line those two up with the dial feet in the second hand. And if you look closely, you'll see there the second hand pinion is coming through. The dial is seated correctly, and we will start tightening up our dial feet screws. And as we tighten them up, we want to make sure that the dial doesn't lift out of the case. Usually it only takes a turn or two, and you're going to tighten those, finger tight. You don't want to push too hard because they're just there to hold the dial in place. The dial's on. With the dial set, I'm going to give this a little bit of a wind. And if you're listening to your own watch, you'll hear it. As it gets a good wind on the spring, you'll hear the escapement ticking very, very loudly for a watch. And that's a good sign that the watch is running perfectly. With that done, now we put the dust ring back in position. The dust ring has a hole, and that's where the stem and the crown go, so you can see the hole here. Okay, and we're going to align that with the clutch. Put that in place. Align that hole and make sure we're centered using your fingers to push down, and if need be, a small screwdriver ever so gently to get that dust ring in its proper position. So that it snaps into place and locks itself. So here again, our dust ring is installed. Our clutch, you can see how we can still get our stem in there and wind the watch. This watch is completely cleaned and assembled. Now, you're probably saying to yourself that why it doesn't have hands, how could you say it's assembled? Well, the watch itself is assembled. The casing is a different step. The next thing we're going to do with the case is we're going to make sure that the stem and crown all work fine. There's no debris in the case. This case is relatively cleaned. It's got some issues. It's pretty worn. It's a gold-filled case. The brassings come through. This watch was pretty well used in its lifetime. Although, as you can see, it runs perfectly. So we look at that balance wheel. That's the kind of turn we want on that balance wheel. We want to hear a nice even 5 beats per second. You're not going to be able to tell that with your ear unless you've got a really good ear. But you're going to look for at least a 180-degree swing on that balance staff. And I can just tell that right now we've got more than that, so that's good. You're going to look for on your case the top and bottom. The top opening is always wider than the bottom opening, so the measurement from here to here is always wider on top. And that's because the watch goes in from the top first. Now how you case this, you take your stem, I'll move the stem here, as you can see, is going to go into the clutch. You take that and we just gently hold the movement, and I'm going to turn it. Now the dial should be flush or close to flush with the top of the case, and in this case it is. The next step is to hold that completely, flip it over, put it on your foam pad or your watch pad, and this is where the case screws are going to go back into the watch. We'll take our 2 case screws. Case screws go in each of the 2 positions. And these screws, once you tighten them down, are going to hold the movement from behind the case on the bottom of the watch movement, and they're going to hold them in place. Now I'm going to tighten these down a little bit. Not too tight, because I want to be able to wiggle the movement in the watch, but I don't want the watch movement to fall out of the case, so we'll tighten those down. And I'm going to wiggle this a little bit, because by doing that I'm centering the movement. I'll hold it down now and tighten up these screws. Again, you're going to tighten these hand tight. You're not going to tighten them like they're some kind of a machine part. Just want them holding close in a tight manner. In some cases, like here, we have a full head. In other cases, you'll have half heads. The half head screws do exactly the same thing, except that they have a half head which aligns the movement better to the case. You know, some people have personal preferences. Personally, I like the full screw head, because then I know that the watch is not going to slip. Once that's done, I'm going to take the back cover and we're going to gently screw this back into position. These are fine threaded. You're going to wiggle this. Sometimes if you can't get the case to go on, what I often recommend is put it on, turn it counterclockwise until you hear the thread snap into position. You may or may not do that, depends on the severity of the wear on the case. Like there's the snap, and then tighten it up. The back cover's on. We listen for the ticking. The watch is running perfect. Any debris, blow off the dial. I always start with the second hand, and that's the next step. We're going to put the hands on this watch. So I take my hand, and you're going to ever so gently, the little hole in the second hand is going to go on that second hand pinion. I'm holding this with very little pressure, and you can see it's on there, it's turning, and now we're gently going to push it down and align it. Now you're pushing this down. You want to make sure that both ends of the second hand are above the sub-dial so that there's no friction with the second hand rubbing against the dial. The next step is to align your hour hand. Here here is where staking sets become in handy. You can make your own tool to do this if you want. What you want is a tool, either plastic or metal, that has a hole in it, and that hole will fall into place right on top of the pinion, the cannon pinion. And what I want to do now is take my hour hand, make sure that it's right side up. You see there's a little tab on the bottom of the hour hand, and that tab goes down, and you're going to get it aligned, and then gently push down with that tool so that the hour hand is in its proper place. So now you see we've got the hour hand on. I'm going to set the stem in the setting position, and I'm going to turn it to make sure that we don't touch the second hand. And you can hold it at an angle so that you can see if the hands are going to touch. We're going to be looking at the gap between the hour hand and the second hand and making sure that in no position do they touch each other. And here we're good. We're not seeing any touching. As a matter of fact, I could probably push that down just a little bit more. Now, I know my hour hand is not going to touch the second hand. I'm going to set this at a correct hour position. I'm going to set it at the 3 o'clock position so the clock would be reading 3 o'clock. And now I'm going to put my minute hand on. And on a minute hand, I do this myself. I put the minute hand on. I align it to the 12 o'clock position. I take my tool and gently push down straight on that minute hand. And I'm going to wiggle it around just to make sure that it's in position. Again, we're going to be looking for if the hand's touching the dial. In this case it is. I'm going to lift it up a little bit. Make sure that it's not touching the hand and the dial. Once that's set, you can see now my minute hand turns freely. And now again, we're going to adjust anything that we need to make adjustments to see if that minute hand and the hour hand are free of each other. And in this case they are. We're going to run all the way across to make sure that the minute hand does not touch the dial at any position. And it doesn't. Now we'll take our cover. Again, we're going to turn this ever so slightly until I make sure I hear the threads fall into place. And then I'll tighten it up. I'll set this 12 o'clock. We'll give it a good wind. There you are, one clean American Waltham 17 jewel 16 size pocket watch ready to go. The next step is you time the watch. There's 2 ways of timing a watch. You may not be able to afford the equipment to time it electronically, so here's what I typically do. Because timing equipment can be expensive. You can spend $400 to $4,000 on a timing machine. When I started, I timed it by keeping the watch in multiple positions during the day. So I would clean a watch, wind the spring, get the watch ready, and then I would put it flat, face up, face down. I'd hold it in a holder upright, and then upside down. And then I would time the watch every hour during the day. And as the watch runs, what you want to do is make sure that it's keeping accurate time. If it's not keeping accurate time, you can go to your speed adjustment on the watch. Your speed adjustment in this particular watch, it has a little dial that you turn this little star wheel one way or the other to speed it up or slow it down. This is your lever to indicate if it's fast or slow. And on every watch, you'll have either a plus sign or a minus sign, or in this case, an F or an S. If I move this lever closer this way, then I'm going to speed up the watch. If I take this lever and I swing it this way, I'm going to slow down the watch. And that's how you time your watch, ever so gently. I make usually 20-degree turns, and I just go from there. We'll be covering timing in another section of this course. There it is, American-made Walton pocket watch, 17 jewel, 16 size, clean, timed, and ready.